The old upright piano had been in the corner of May's living room for as long as she could remember. It had belonged to her grandmother, a wedding gift from decades ago that somehow found its way into their small apartment on the edge of town. The wood was scratched in places, the ivory keys yellowed with age, but to May it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She first touched those keys when she was just 6 years old. Her fingers, small and uncertain, pressed down gently, and the sound that came forth felt like magic. From that moment on, the piano became her escape, her confidant, her dream. Their town wasn't the kind of place where music lessons were easy to come by. Most families were too busy making ends meet to worry about things like piano teachers. May's parents worked long hours at the local factory, leaving her to figure out the piano mostly on her own. "You have a good ear," her mother would say, listening to May play in the evenings. "You remind me of your grandmother." May treasured those words. Without formal training, she turned to whatever resources she could find. The town library had a small section of music books, most outdated and well-worn. She borrowed each one, studying the notes and techniques with fierce concentration. When the internet came to their home, a luxury they could barely afford, May discovered online tutorials and videos of great pianists. She would watch them for hours, mimicking their hand positions, trying to understand how they coaxed such beautiful sounds from the instrument. By the time she turned 19, May had taught herself to play dozens of classical pieces. Her technique wasn't perfect, she knew that much. Without a proper teacher to correct her mistakes, she had developed habits that would make any trained pianist wince. But what she lacked in technical precision, she made up for with raw emotion. When May played, people felt something. "You should try for a real school," her high school music teacher had suggested during her senior year. "There are scholarships for students like you." The idea took root in May's mind and wouldn't let go. She researched music schools online during breaks at the diner where she worked as a waitress. The Harmon Conservatory stood out immediately, its reputation legendary, its alumni list filled with names of pianists May had studied through grainy YouTube videos. The application fee alone cost more than she made in 2 days of work, but she saved every tip, putting them in a jar labeled Future. It took 8 months of double shifts, of running between tables with aching feet and a smile that never faltered, before she had enough money for the application fee and a bus ticket to the city. Her parents were supportive but worried. "These schools, they're for people with money, with connections," her father said gently. "I don't want you to be disappointed." "I have to try," May replied, "just once." The night before her audition, May couldn't sleep. She lay awake, replaying the Chopin piece she had selected over and over in her mind. It wasn't the most technically challenging piece in her repertoire, but it was the one that spoke to her heart. She had been playing it for years, refining it, making it her own. The Harmon Conservatory was even more intimidating in person than in pictures. The building stood tall and imposing, its stone facade speaking of tradition and excellence. Inside, the hallways were lined with photographs of famous alumni and visiting musicians. May felt small walking those corridors, her second-hand dress and worn shoes marking her as an outsider. The waiting area outside the audition room was filled with other applicants, most accompanied by parents or private teachers. They carried leather portfolios with their music, discussing techniques in conservatories and summer programs in Europe with easy familiarity. May clutched her photocopied sheet music, the pages dog-eared from constant use. A girl with perfectly styled hair glanced at May's folder and smiled thinly. "First audition?" May nodded. "Who's your teacher?" "I don't have one," May admitted. "I taught myself." The girl's eyebrows shot up and she exchanged a look with the boy sitting next to her. Their silent communication was clear enough. This girl doesn't belong here. Before May could say anything else, the door to the audition room opened and a student assistant called her name. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stood, her legs suddenly feeling like water. The audition room was larger than she expected, with high ceilings and windows that flooded the space with natural light. In the center sat a magnificent grand piano, its gleaming surface reflecting the lights above. Along one wall, a panel of 5 people sat behind a table. their expressions neutral as they looked up from their notes. "You may begin when ready," said the man in the center, not bothering to introduce himself or the others. May didn't know it then, but this was Professor Robert Walsh, the piano department head whose reputation for brutal honesty preceded him throughout the music world. His standards were impossibly high, his criticism cutting and precise. Students both feared and revered him. May approached the piano, taking a moment to adjust the bench. The keys felt different under her fingers, more responsive, more alive than her old upright at home. She took a deep breath, centered herself, and began to play. For the first few measures, the music flowed naturally. May closed her eyes, letting the familiar notes wash over her. But then something shifted. Perhaps it was the unfamiliar piano, or the pressure of the moment, or the weight of all her dreams hanging in the balance. Her fingers stumbled over a passage she had played flawlessly hundreds of times before. She recovered quickly, but in her rush to get back on track, she missed a subtle, dynamic change. From the corner of her eye, she saw Professor Walsh write something on his notepad, his mouth turning down at the corners. She pushed forward, trying to recapture the feeling of the piece, but the damage was done. Her confidence shaken, she played the rest mechanically, just trying to make it to the end without further mistakes. When she finished, the silence in the room felt heavy. Professor Walsh looked at her over his reading glasses. "Your name again?" he asked, though her application was right in front of him. "May Lin," she answered, her voice barely audible. "Ms. Lin, where did you study previously?" "I didn't. I taught myself, with books and videos." A ripple of murmurs passed through the panel. Professor Walsh leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his notepad. "That explains quite a bit," he said. "Your technique is, well, problematic would be putting it kindly. Your posture is incorrect, your fingering inconsistent, and your interpretation lacks fundamental understanding of the composer's intentions." Each word felt like a physical blow. May stood frozen by the piano, unable to speak. "The left-hand arpeggios, in measures 16 through 24, Walsh continued, were particularly troubling, and your pedaling throughout was excessive, muddying the harmonic structure." One of the other panel members, a younger woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. "There were some nice moments of expression," she offered, but Walsh cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Expression without technique is just noise," he said firmly. "Ms. Lin, the Harmon Conservatory admits students who have demonstrated years of proper training and exceptional talent. We are not equipped to teach basic fundamentals to beginners." Someone at the back of the room, a student observer perhaps, let out a short laugh, quickly stifled. May felt her face burn with shame. Walsh sighed, removing his glasses. "Perhaps you should try something less ambitious. Community college has music appreciation courses that might be more your speed, or perhaps piano is simply not your instrument." The younger woman on the panel looked uncomfortable, but said nothing as Walsh closed his folder with finality. "Thank you for your time," he said dismissively. May nodded woodenly, gathered her sheet, music with trembling hands, and walked out of the room. In the hallway she could hear muffled conversation from inside, followed by more laughter. The sound followed her down the corridor, past the wall of successful alumni who had never known such humiliation. Outside, the bright afternoon sunshine felt like a mockery. May sat on a bench in the small park across from the conservatory, clutching her folder to her chest, unable to cry, unable to move. All those years of practice, of believing in herself, of dreaming, had they been nothing but self-delusion? The bus back home wouldn't leave for hours. May watched as other applicants came and went from the building, some looking pleased, others disappointed, all of them belonging to a world she had foolishly thought she could enter. Rough audition? May looked up to see an older woman sitting on the other end of the bench. She hadn't noticed her arrive. The woman had silver hair pulled back in a simple bun, and wore a plain coat despite the prestigious surroundings. "I don't belong here," May said, surprising herself with the admission. The woman smiled slightly. "That's what they want you to think. No, they're right. I don't have proper training. I taught myself." Did you? How interesting. The woman's eyes lit up. That takes tremendous dedication. May shrugged. Doesn't matter. The professor said my technique is all wrong. Robert Walsh, I presume. He said the same to countless students over the years. The woman chuckled. Some deserved it. Others. She trailed off, looking at the conservatory building. Others just needed a different kind of teacher. There was something about the woman's voice that made May look at her more closely. Do you work at the school? No, not anymore. I taught here many years ago before Robert's time. She turned to face May directly. Tell me, why do you play piano? The question caught May off guard. No one had ever asked her that before because... She started, then paused, searching for the right words. Because when I play, I can say things I don't know how to say otherwise. It feels like the most honest version of myself. The woman nodded slowly, a smile spreading across her face. That, she said quietly, is the only reason that matters. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, handing it to May. My name is Eleanor Wright. If you're interested in continuing your piano education, properly this time, give me a call. May stared at the card. The name seemed vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. I don't have money for lessons, she admitted. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. We can discuss that later. First, I'd like to hear you play something. Something you love, not something you think would impress Robert Walsh. As the woman stood to leave, May found her voice again. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Eleanor looked back with a curious expression, somewhere between amusement and determination. Because, she said simply, Robert Walsh once laughed at me too. 3 days passed before May found the courage to call the number on Eleanor's card. 3 days of replaying Professor Walsh's cutting remarks in her head, of wondering if she should just give up on her dream and focus on something more practical. Her parents had been kind when she returned home, not asking too many questions when they saw her face. Whatever happened, her mother said, folding laundry at the kitchen table, remember that trying takes more courage than staying safe. Those words echoed in May's mind as she finally dialed Eleanor's number from the diner's back room during her break. The phone rang 4 times and May was about to hang up when Eleanor answered. Yes, hello? Her voice sounded just as May remembered, clear and direct. This is May Lynn. We met at the conservatory, May said, suddenly feeling foolish. You gave me your card. Ah, yes. The warmth in Eleanor's voice was immediate. I was hoping you'd call. When can you come play for me? May hesitated. I work most days. Maybe Sunday morning. Sunday at 10. I'll text you my address. The call ended before May could say anything else. She stared at the phone, wondering what she had just committed to. Part of her wanted to text back and cancel, to protect herself from more disappointment. But a smaller, braver part pushed her forward. Eleanor's home was in an older part of the city, a modest brownstone on a quiet street lined with trees just beginning to show their spring leaves. May arrived early, standing nervously on the sidewalk for 10 minutes before finally climbing the steps to ring the bell at precisely 10 o'clock. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Eleanor dressed in a simple sweater and slacks, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. Punctual, good. She gestured May inside. Tea first, then music. The interior of the home was nothing like May had imagined. She had expected something grand and imposing like the conservatory. Instead, the space was warm and lived in, with books stacked on nearly every surface and art covering the walls. The furniture was comfortable rather than formal, and sunlight streamed through large windows. Most striking, though, was the piano. It stood in the front room, not a glossy grand like at the conservatory, but an older upright model, similar to May's own but clearly of much higher quality. Its wood gleamed with the soft patina that comes from decades of loving care. Sit, Eleanor said, pointing to a chair in the small kitchen while she prepared tea. Tell me about yourself. How long have you been playing? May shared her story. The old piano in the corner, teaching herself from library books, the videos she had watched over and over until she memorized every movement. Eleanor listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally as she poured the tea. And what do you want? She asked finally, placing a steaming cup in front of May. From music, I mean. The question caught May off guard. I want to be good enough, she said after a moment. Good enough for what? For whom? For... May struggled to find the right words. For people to hear me. Really hear me. Eleanor smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. That's a better answer than most I've heard from conservatory students. She set down her cup. Now, let's hear you play. Whatever you like. May approached the piano with a familiar mix of reverence and anxiety. This instrument was clearly special. The keys felt responsive under her fingers as she settled onto the bench. She took a deep breath and began to play a piece she knew by heart. A nocturne she had learned from her grandmother's old songbook. As she played, she felt Eleanor's eyes on her, watching her hands, her posture, her expression. Unlike at the audition, where she had felt judged and found wanting, here May felt seen. She finished the piece and waited, hands resting in her lap. You have extraordinary ears, Eleanor said finally. Your instincts about the emotional core of the music are spot on. She moved to stand beside the piano. But your technique is holding you back. Show me your hands. May held out her hands, and Eleanor took them gently, examining her fingers, the shape of her palms. Good pianist's hands, strong. Now, play a C major scale, both hands. May did as instructed, and Eleanor immediately shook her head. Your wrists are too tight. Your fingers are working twice as hard as they need to. She demonstrated the proper position. Like this. The power comes from your entire arm, not just your fingers. Try again. They spent the next hour on basics, hand position, wrist movement, proper fingering. By the end, May's arms ached in places they never had before, but when she played the simple scale again, the difference in sound was remarkable. That's enough for today, Eleanor said. Practice just like that for 30 minutes every day this week. No pieces, just these exercises.
Can you come back next Sunday?
Yes, May said, then hesitated. But I still don't understand why you're helping me. And I can't pay for lessons. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, looking at a photograph on the wall that May hadn't noticed before. It showed a much younger Eleanor standing next to an elderly man at a piano. Do you know who Vladimir Horowitz was? She asked. May nodded. Even with her limited education, she knew that name. One of the greatest pianists of the 20th century. I studied with him briefly, Eleanor said. Not at a conservatory, but privately. I was older than most students, and like you, I had been rejected by the establishment. Horowitz took me on because he heard something in my playing that transcended technique. She smiled at the memory. He said technique can be taught, but music must be felt. She turned back to May. I'm helping you because someone once helped me. As for payment, she gestured around the room. I have everything I need. Perhaps someday you'll do the same for another young pianist. The weekly lessons became the center of May's life. She rearranged her work schedule at the diner, picking up early morning shifts so she could practice in the afternoons. At home, she taped notes about proper hand position to her bedroom wall, falling asleep each night with Eleanor's instructions echoing in her mind. Progress was both faster and slower than May expected. Some aspects of technique came naturally once she understood the principles behind them. Others required breaking habits she had formed over years of self-teaching. Patience, Eleanor would say whenever May grew frustrated. You're not just learning to play, you're retraining your entire body. 3 months into their lessons, Eleanor introduced a new element. Today we work on sound, she announced. One note. May looked confused. One note? Yes, just one. Eleanor pressed a single key in the middle register of the piano. Listen to that. Really listen? What do you hear? May listened to the note fade. It's just see. No, it's not just anything. Play it yourself. May pressed the same key. Now listen to the difference, Eleanor said, playing the same note again. At first, May couldn't hear it. Then gradually she began to notice. Eleanor's note had a different quality, a fullness, a presence that May's lacked. How do you do that? She asked. It's in the approach. The way your finger connects with the key, the weight behind it. Eleanor demonstrated in slow motion. You're not just pressing a key, you're drawing sound from the instrument. Try again, but this time, imagine the sound you want before you play. May spent the entire lesson on that single note, playing it over and over, listening, adjusting, trying to match the sound Eleanor produced. By the end, her forearm ached and her concentration was exhausted. But the difference in her playing was unmistakable. That, Eleanor said with satisfaction, is how you make people listen. The lessons continued, growing more intense as May's skills developed. Eleanor was a demanding teacher, pushing May beyond what she thought possible but always with a clear purpose. They worked through technical exercises, theory and interpretation, building a foundation that grew stronger by the week. 6 months in, Eleanor handed May a new piece of music, the same Chopin she had played at her failed audition. "I don't want to play this again," May said, pushing the music away. "Exactly why you must," Eleanor replied firmly. "Music isn't just about playing what feels good. It's about confronting what challenges you, what scares you." Reluctantly, May began to work on the piece again, this time with Eleanor's guidance. They broke it down measure by measure, rebuilding it with proper technique and deeper understanding. Gradually, the piece transformed from a painful reminder of failure to a vehicle for expression. 1 year into their work together, during a regular Sunday lesson, Eleanor made an unexpected announcement. "The Harmon Conservatory is hosting its annual showcase next month," she said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Artists from elite music programs across the country will perform. I've submitted your name as an independent entry." May nearly dropped her teacup. "What? No, I can't go back there." "You can and you will," Eleanor said firmly. "You're ready?" "They already rejected me." "Professor Walsh," Robert Walsh, Eleanor interrupted, "is an excellent technician who has forgotten why music matters. His opinion isn't the only one that counts. But how did you even get me in? Don't you need to be affiliated with a school?" Eleanor's smile held a hint of mischief. "I may have called in a few favors. I taught at Harmon for 20 years before retiring. Some people there still remember me." May shook her head. "Even if I could get in, I'm not ready to perform at that level." "You're not the same pianist who auditioned there a year ago," Eleanor said, her voice softening. "Trust what we've built together. Trust yourself." Later that night, May sat at her old upright piano at home staring at the keys. The thought of returning to the conservatory, of facing Professor Walsh again, made her stomach knot with anxiety. But beneath that fear was something new, a confidence born from hundreds of hours of proper practice, from Eleanor's unwavering belief in her potential. She placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes, and played a single note. The sound filled her small room, clear, resonant, alive with intention. She played it again, drawing out even more color and depth. One note. Sometimes that was all it took to say everything that mattered. The day of the showcase arrived with gray skies and a steady drizzle that matched May's mood. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with all the things that could go wrong. Even her usual morning ritual of tea and scales had failed to calm her nerves. "You don't have to do this," her mother said, watching May pick at her breakfast. "No one would blame you for walking away." May looked up, surprised. Her mother had always encouraged her to face challenges head-on. "I would blame me," she replied quietly. "I'd always wonder." Her mother nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Then I'll iron your good dress." Eleanor had arranged to meet May at a small coffee shop near the conservatory. When May arrived, her teacher was already there, looking unusually formal in a deep blue suit, her silver hair swept up elegantly. "You're 15 minutes early," Eleanor noted, checking her watch. "Good, we have time to talk." May slid into the seat across from her, clutching the folder with her sheet music so tightly her knuckles were white. "I'm going to be sick," she admitted. Eleanor pushed a cup of tea across the table. "Ginger, it helps with nerves." She studied May's face. "Tell me what you're afraid of, failing. Making a fool of myself." Professor Walsh laughing at me again. "And if those things happen?" May blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Then, I guess I'll have tried and failed." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "And the sun will still rise tomorrow, and you'll still be a pianist, and we'll still have our Sunday lessons." She leaned forward. "Success today would be wonderful, but it's not the end of your story either way." Something in those words eased the tightness in May's chest. The possibility of failure didn't disappear, but it somehow seemed less catastrophic. "Now," Eleanor continued, "all business again. Let's talk about your performance. What will you do when you walk on stage?" "Take a breath. Adjust the bench. Center myself, and then?" "Begin with the Chopin." Eleanor shook her head. "No, before the Chopin, you'll play your note." May understood immediately. The single note they had spent so many hours perfecting. The calling card they had developed together over the past year. "Just one?" "Just one," Eleanor confirmed. Let them hear what you can do with one note before you show them what you can do with many. They walked to the conservatory together, sharing an umbrella against the light rain. The building looked just as imposing as May remembered, but this time she wasn't alone. At the artist's entrance, Eleanor squeezed her hand. "I'll be in the audience. Remember, you're not playing for them. You're playing for the music." The backstage area was a hive of activity. Student volunteers with clipboards directed performers to waiting rooms, while technicians checked microphones and adjusted lighting. May was directed to a small practice room where she could warm up before her performance. Inside, a young man in a conservatory uniform handed her a program. "You're on after the Yale Quartet," he said. "About 40 minutes from now." May nodded, scanning the program. There she was, listed between the Yale School of Music String Quartet and a pianist from Juilliard. May Lin, independent artist. No school affiliation, no impressive credentials, just her name. She had just settled at the practice piano when the door opened again. A student volunteer poked her head in. "Ms. Lin, there's been a slight change. One of the performers has taken ill, so you'll be going on in 15 minutes instead of 40. May's heart jumped to her throat. 15 minutes? Yes, sorry for the short notice. The girl disappeared, leaving May alone with her panic. 15 minutes. Not enough time to properly warm up, to mentally prepare, to run through the difficult passages one more time. May's hands trembled as she tried to play a simple scale. The keys felt foreign under her fingers, as if all her hours of practice had suddenly evaporated. "Breathe," she whispered to herself, hearing Eleanor's voice in her head. "Just breathe." She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, feeling the air fill her lungs and then release. Slowly, the shaking in her hand subsided. She played a C major scale, then another, feeling the connection between her fingers and the keys grow stronger with each note. Before she knew it, the student volunteer was back. "Ms. Lin, you're on in 2 minutes." The walk to the stage was a blur. May was vaguely aware of people moving around her, of lights dimming and a voice announcing her name. And then she was standing at the edge of the stage, looking out at the Harmon Conservatory's grand hall filled with people, students, faculty, visiting artists. And there in the front row, Professor Robert Walsh, his expression as stern and judgmental as she remembered. For a moment, May froze. The memory of her failed audition washed over her, the mistakes, the humiliation, the laughter. She felt her courage begin to crumble. Then, from the third row, she caught sight of Eleanor, sitting straight-backed and confident, giving her a single, almost imperceptible nod. In that small gesture was a year's worth of lessons, of growth, of transformation. May walked to the grand piano at center stage. The spotlight followed her, warm against her skin. She adjusted the bench carefully, taking her time, establishing her presence on the stage. Then she sat, her posture perfect as Eleanor had taught her, and placed her hands in her lap. She took one deep breath, then another, letting the silence of the hall wash over her. Everyone was waiting, some curiously, some skeptically, Professor Walsh with thinly veiled impatience. But May was no longer hurried by their expectations. When she was ready, truly ready, she lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. And then, instead of launching into the Chopin as everyone expected, she played a single note, one perfect middle C. She played it with everything Eleanor had taught her, the proper arm weight, the precise finger position, the exact amount of pressure needed to draw out the fullest, richest sound the piano could produce. The note rang out clear and true, filling every corner of the hall with its resonance. The audience, who had been shuffling programs and whispering, went completely still. That one note hung in the air, sustained by the pedal, vibrating with an intensity that seemed to reach beyond the mere striking of a string. In that note was everything May had learned about music, not just technique, but emotion, intention, communication. As the sound began to fade, she released the pedal and let silence reclaim the hall. Only then did she begin the Chopin. The piece flowed from her fingers with a confidence she had never felt before. All the technical elements Eleanor had drilled into her were there, the precise fingering, the careful pedaling, the balanced dynamics, but they served something greater. Each phrase told a story. Each harmonic shift painted a mood. Each crescendo and diminuendo breathed like a living thing. When she reached the section that had fallen apart during her audition, her fingers moved with certainty and grace, transforming what had once been a source of shame into a moment of beauty. May was no longer playing for the audience, for Professor Walsh, or even for Eleanor. She was playing for the music itself, letting it speak through her in the way Chopin had intended when he first put pen to paper. When the final notes faded away, May kept her hands on the keys for a moment, eyes closed, feeling the vibrations of the piano beneath her fingers. Then she lowered her hands to her lap and looked up. The hall remained silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of an unimpressed audience, but the profound silence that follows something unexpected, something that has momentarily suspended the normal flow of time and thought. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to applaud. Others joined, and suddenly the entire hall erupted in applause. May stood and bowed, her eyes finding Eleanor in the crowd. Her teacher was smiling, eyes bright with unshed tears. As May left the stage, she passed the next performer waiting in the wings, the Juilliard pianist looking somewhat shaken. "That first note," he said, stopping her. "How did you do that?" May smiled, thinking of all the hours she had spent on that single note. All the failed attempts, all the tiny adjustments Eleanor had helped her make. "Practice," she said simply, and continued walking. Backstage, May was surrounded by conservatory students and faculty, all asking questions, offering congratulations, handing her business cards. The same people who had ignored or dismissed her a year ago now wanted to know who she was, where she had studied, what her plans were. Through the crowd, May spotted a familiar figure approaching, Professor Robert Walsh. The backstage area quieted as he made his way toward her, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Lynn," he said, his voice formal but lacking its former dismissiveness. That was unexpected. May met his gaze steadily, no longer intimidated. "Thank you, Professor. You've clearly been working hard since your audition. Your technique has improved considerably." "I found the right teacher," May replied, looking past him to where Eleanor stood at the edge of the group, watching the exchange with interest. Walsh followed her gaze, his eyes widening slightly in recognition. "Eleanor Wright," he said, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. "I should have known." Eleanor stepped forward, a small smile playing at her lips. "Hello, Robert. It's been a while." "Indeed it has." He turned back to May. "Ms. Lynn, the conservatory hosts master classes for exceptional outside talents. Perhaps you would be interested in attending." Before May could respond, Eleanor cut in smoothly. "I think May is doing quite well with her current arrangement, don't you, Robert?" The professor's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. He gave a curt nod and moved away through the crowd. "What was that about?" May asked as Eleanor guided her toward the exit. "Old history," Eleanor replied. "Nothing worth revisiting. The important thing is that you showed them all what real music sounds like." She squeezed May's shoulder. "Now let's go celebrate. This is just the beginning." As they left the conservatory, May noticed the rain had stopped. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the wet pavement. She thought about how much had changed in a year, not just her playing, but herself. The frightened girl who had fled this building in shame was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, more truly herself, all because she had learned to play one perfect note. News of May's performance spread quickly through the music world. What began as whispers among students at the showcase grew into discussions among faculty members, then caught the attention of music critics who had attended the event. 3 days after the showcase, a well-respected classical music blog published a review that mentioned May specifically. Among the polished performances from elite conservatory students, it was an unknown independent artist, May Lynn, who provided the evening's most memorable moment. Her interpretation of Chopin showed not just technical skill, but a rare emotional intelligence that many formally trained pianists never achieve. Eleanor brought a printed copy to their next lesson, sliding it across the piano bench with a satisfied smile. "They're talking about you." May read the paragraph twice, hardly believing her own name on the page. "This is strange. Get used to it," Eleanor said, tapping the paper. This is just the beginning, she was right. Within weeks, May received an invitation to perform at a small recital series at a local university. Then came an offer to participate in a chamber music festival. Each performance led to another opportunity, each audience connecting her to new corners of the music world she had once thought permanently closed to her. Through it all, May continued working at the diner, studying with Eleanor, and practicing with the same dedication as before. But now there was a new energy to her work, a sense of direction and purpose that came from knowing her music was being heard. "You should quit the diner," Eleanor suggested one Sunday afternoon, after a particularly grueling lesson on a Bach prelude. "You need more time to practice, especially with the Riverside concert coming up." May shook her head. "I still need to pay rent. Music doesn't cover the bills yet." "It could," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "Have you considered teaching?" The idea had never occurred to May. "Teaching? I'm still learning myself." "The best teachers always are," Eleanor replied. "You have something valuable to offer, especially to beginners and students who don't fit the traditional mold." That evening, May created a simple flyer offering piano lessons for beginners. She posted it at the local library, coffee shops, and community center, not expecting much response. To her surprise, within a week, she had 5 potential students, mostly children whose parents wanted them to try music without the pressure of formal training, plus one elderly man who had always wanted to learn. Her first student was 8-year-old Lily, a shy girl who reminded May of herself at that age. When Lily arrived for her lesson, she stared at the piano with a mixture of fascination and terror. "It looks complicated," she whispered. "It can be," May admitted. "But we'll start with something simple." She guided Lily's small hand to the keyboard. Just one note. They spent the entire 30-minute lesson on that single note. How to sit properly, how to shape her hand, how to listen to the sound she was creating. By the end, Lily had produced a clear, confident C that filled May's small apartment. "That was beautiful," May told her truthfully. Lily beamed. "Can I learn another note next time?" "Absolutely." As May's teaching practice grew, so did her reputation as a performer. 6 months after the showcase, she received an email that made her heart skip. An invitation to audition for a prestigious fellowship program that provided funding and performance opportunities to emerging artists. The program was selective. Only 4 pianists would be chosen. But if accepted, it would allow May to focus on music full-time. "You have to apply," Eleanor insisted when May showed her the email. "The audition is in New York," May pointed out. "I can't afford that trip." Eleanor waved away the objection. "Consider it an investment in your future. I'll help with the expenses." "I can't ask you to do that. You didn't ask." "I offered." Eleanor's tone made it clear the matter was settled. "Now what will you play?" The audition pieces required were demanding: a Bach prelude and fugue, a classical sonata movement, a romantic work, and a piece composed after 1950. May and Eleanor spent weeks selecting the perfect program, balancing technical challenges with pieces that would showcase May's unique voice as a performer. "The modern piece is the wild card," Eleanor said as they reviewed the final selection. "This is where you can really stand out." They chose a rarely performed work by a female composer, filled with unusual harmonies and rhythmic complexities. It was the most difficult piece May had ever attempted, pushing the boundaries of her technique and musicality. But there was something in its unconventional beauty that spoke to her deeply. In the weeks leading up to the audition, May cut back her teaching hours and quit the diner entirely, focusing all her energy on preparation. She practiced from early morning until her neighbors complained in the evening, working through each measure with meticulous attention to detail. The night before her flight to New York, May visited her parents for dinner. Her father, who had always been quietly supportive but never quite understood her dedication to music, surprised her with a gift: a new leather portfolio for her sheet music. "We're proud of you," he said simply, "no matter what happens tomorrow." The audition venue was a historic concert hall in Manhattan, its backstage areas a maze of practice rooms and dressing areas. As May warmed up, she could hear snippets of other pianists practicing: dazzling technical displays, thunderous octaves, light-speed scales. For a moment, her old doubts resurfaced. These were real pianists with years of conservatory training and competition wins. What was she doing here? Then she remembered Eleanor's words from their last lesson. "They have technique. You have something rarer, a voice. Let them hear it." When her turn came, May walked onto the stage to face the panel of judges, distinguished pianists, composers, and music directors, all seated in the first few rows of the otherwise empty hall. Their expressions were neutral, their notepads ready. "Please begin when you're ready," said the woman at the center of the panel. May sat at the magnificent concert grand, its glossy surface reflecting the stage lights. She adjusted the bench, placed her hands in her lap, and took a deep breath. Then, as had become her custom since the showcase, she began with a single note. The sound bloomed in the perfect acoustics of the hall, pure and resonant. May felt the piano respond to her touch, felt the note travel through the air to the judges, saw them look up from their papers with sudden interest. She moved from that one note into her program, each piece flowing naturally into the next. The Bach was precise yet expressive, the classical sonata balanced and clear. When she reached the romantic work, the same Chopin she had played at the showcase, she allowed herself to sink deeper into the emotional landscape of the music. But it was the modern piece where May truly took flight. All the work she had done with Eleanor, the focus on sound, on intention, on communication, found its perfect expression in this unconventional music. Each unusual chord, each surprising rhythmic shift became a statement of artistic purpose. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the woman in the center of the panel set down her pen. "Ms. Lynn," she said, "that was remarkable. Particularly your interpretation of the Hansen piece. May I ask who you study with?" "Eleanor Wright," May replied. A murmur passed through the panel. One of the older judges leaned forward. "Eleanor Wright? The Eleanor Wright who studied with Horowitz?" May nodded. "She hasn't taught in years," another judge commented. "Not since she left Harmon. She teaches me," May said simply. The panel asked a few more questions about her background and training, their interest clearly piqued by the mention of Eleanor's name. As May left the stage, she felt a cautious sense of hope. She had done her best. The rest was out of her hands. The 3 weeks of waiting for the fellowship results were the longest of May's life. She threw herself into teaching, taking on more students to distract herself from constantly checking her email. Eleanor, for her part, seemed completely unconcerned about the outcome. "You played beautifully," she said when May expressed her anxiety. "Whatever happens next is just details." The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while May was giving a lesson. She didn't see it until her student had left, and even then, she hesitated before opening it, preparing herself for disappointment. The first word she saw was "congratulations." May read the entire email 3 times to be sure she understood. She had been selected as one of the 4 fellowship recipients. For the next 2 years, she would receive funding for further study, performance opportunities across the country, and mentorship from some of the most respected musicians in the field. Her first call was to Eleanor. When she shared the news, her teacher's response was characteristic. "Well, of course they chose you. Now the real work begins." Her parents were more demonstrative, her mother crying happy tears as May explained what the fellowship meant. Her father, usually so practical, suggested they go out for a special dinner to celebrate. "I always worried about you," he admitted over dessert. "I thought music was a dream that would only lead to disappointment. I'm glad you proved me wrong." The fellowship began with an orientation in New York, where May met the other recipients, a violinist, a cellist, and another pianist, all from prestigious conservatories. The other pianist, Thomas, had been studying piano since he was 4 years old and had degrees from both Curtis and Juilliard. "And where did you do your undergraduate work?" he asked May during their first lunch together. "I didn't," she replied honestly. "I'm self-taught with private lessons from Eleanor Wright." Thomas looked skeptical. "And that was enough to get you here?" "Interesting." His tone suggested it was anything but interesting, more like suspicious or undeserved. But May no longer felt the need to justify her unconventional path. Her playing spoke for itself. The fellowship's artistic director, a renowned conductor named Diane Powell, took a particular interest in May's development. "You have a unique approach to sound," she told May after hearing her practice. "Eleanor Wright's influence, I assume?" "Yes," May said. "She taught me that one perfect note is worth more than 1,000 rushed ones." Diane smiled. "She would know. You're lucky to have found her." "Actually," May replied, thinking back to that day outside the conservatory, "I think she found me." The first year of the fellowship passed in a whirlwind of master classes, performances, and travel. May found herself living a life she had never imagined possible, playing in historic venues, meeting renowned musicians, and developing her artistry in ways that would have remained out of reach without the fellowship's support. Throughout it all, she maintained her connection with Eleanor, calling her mentor after every significant performance and returning home whenever possible for lessons. Though surrounded by brilliant teachers and musicians in the fellowship program, May knew that Eleanor's guidance remained irreplaceable. "They're trying to change your sound," Eleanor observed during one of these visits. After listening to May play a Beethoven sonata she had been working on with one of the fellowship's piano coaches. "Dr. Levine says my interpretation is too introspective," May admitted. "He wants more drama, more contrast." Eleanor made a dismissive gesture. "There are 1,000 pianists who play Beethoven with drama. The world doesn't need another one. What makes your playing special is your ability to find the intimate voice within the grand gesture." This tension between developing new skills and staying true to her unique voice became a constant in May's fellowship experience. Some of the program's mentors recognized and valued her distinctive approach. Others, like Dr. Levine, seemed determined to reshape her into a more conventional performer. Her fellow pianist in the program, Thomas, remained skeptical of May's abilities and background. Though never openly hostile, his comments often carried an edge of condescension. "That's an interesting choice of fingering," he remarked after watching her practice a particularly difficult passage. "Not what they teach at conservatory, but if it works for you." Rather than being discouraged by these interactions, May found herself growing more confident in her artistic choices. The success of her performances, frequently noted by critics for their unusual depth and communication, gave her the courage to trust her instincts, even when they ran counter to traditional approaches. Midway through the second year of the fellowship, Diane Powell, the program's artistic director, called May into her office. "I have an unusual opportunity for you," she said, sliding a brochure across her desk. "The Harmon Conservatory is celebrating its centennial with a special concert series featuring distinguished alumni and artists. They've asked our fellowship program to recommend a pianist for their Emerging Artists Showcase." May picked up the brochure, her stomach tightening at the sight of the familiar building on its cover. "And you're recommending me?" "I am," Diane confirmed. "Unless you'd rather not return there. I understand you have some history with the institution." May was silent for a moment, thinking about her failed audition 3 years earlier, about Professor Walsh's dismissive laughter, about returning for the showcase with Eleanor. "Who would attend this concert?" she asked finally. "Everyone who matters in classical music education," Diane replied. "Department heads from major conservatories, foundation directors, competition judges, the press." She paused. "Including Robert Walsh, who now chairs Harmon's piano department." Of course he did, May thought. Success seemed to follow people like Walsh, who moved through the world with unshakable confidence in their own importance. "I'll do it," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. That evening, May called Eleanor to share the news. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor asked after a long silence. "You have nothing to prove to Robert Walsh or Harmon." "It's not about proving anything," May said, though she wasn't entirely convinced that was true. "It's a good professional opportunity. Just remember why you play," Eleanor said. "Not for them. Not for anyone's approval. For the music itself." In the weeks leading up to the centennial concert, May threw herself into preparation with an intensity that surprised even her fellowship mentors. She selected a program that would showcase not just her technical abilities, but her artistic vision, works that spoke to the emotional core of why she had fallen in love with the piano in the first place. The centerpiece would be a rarely performed piece by a female composer from the early 20th century, a work of extraordinary beauty and complexity that had been largely overlooked by the mainstream classical world. Eleanor had introduced May to the piece during their second year of working together, and May had felt an immediate connection to its unique voice. As the concert date approached, Thomas cornered May after a rehearsal. "I heard you're playing the Harmon Centennial," he said, his tone unusually serious. "Bold choice. What do you mean?" "Walsh will be in the front row," Thomas replied. "He's not known for his open-mindedness, especially about non-traditional repertoire. The piece you're planning to feature, it's not exactly standard conservatory fare." May was surprised that Thomas knew her program. "Are you suggesting I should change it?" Thomas shrugged. "I'm just saying that if you want to impress someone like Walsh, there are safer choices. Virtuosic Liszt, some flashy Rachmaninoff. That's the kind of thing he respects." For a brief moment, May considered the advice. Perhaps Thomas was right. Perhaps this was an opportunity to show Walsh and the conservatory world that she could excel on their terms, playing their kind of music. But then she remembered Eleanor's words. Not for them. For the music itself. Thanks for the concern, she told Thomas, but I'll stick with my original program. The day of the concert arrived bright and clear. May had arranged for Eleanor to attend, sending her a plane ticket and booking a hotel room near the conservatory. They met for breakfast that morning, Eleanor looking elegant but slightly out of place among the conservatory crowd in the hotel restaurant. Nervous? Eleanor asked, watching May pick at her food. A little, May admitted. It feels like coming full circle. Eleanor nodded. In a way, it is. But you're not the same pianist who auditioned here 3 years ago. Remember that. The concert hall was even more imposing than May remembered, its grand architecture a physical embodiment of the classical music establishment's traditions and values. Backstage, she was treated with professional courtesy by the staff, though she couldn't help noticing how differently they interacted with the other performers. Alumni with impressive degrees and competition wins listed in their biographies. From the wings, May watched as the hall filled with exactly the audience Diane had described. The gatekeepers of the classical music world, people whose opinions could shape careers. And there, in the front row, sat Professor Robert Walsh, older but unchanged in his air of absolute authority. As the house lights dimmed and the stage manager signaled her 5-minute warning, May felt a moment of doubt. What was she doing here, still an outsider in this world of traditions and expectations? Perhaps Thomas had been right about her program choice, about the risk of presenting something so personal to this particular audience. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. Eleanor, who had come backstage to wish her luck. One perfect note, her teacher reminded her quietly. Everything else follows from that. When May's name was announced, the applause was polite but reserved. She walked onto the stage with measured steps, acknowledging the audience with a brief bow before taking her seat at the piano. As she adjusted the bench, she caught sight of Walsh in the front row, reviewing her program with a slight frown. May placed her hands in her lap and took a breath. Then, as had become her signature since that first showcase, she began with a single note. Middle C, played with all the tonal control and intentionality that Eleanor had taught her. The note resonated through the hall, pure and true. May watched as heads lifted throughout the audience. Conversation stilled, programs stopped rustling. Even Walsh looked up, his attention caught by the unusual beginning. From that one note, May moved into her program. She played with complete conviction, not attempting to impress or conform to what she imagined the audience wanted to hear, but simply offering her most honest musical voice. When she reached the centerpiece, the overlooked female composer's work, she allowed herself to become fully immersed in its unique sound world. The piece demanded everything she had developed as a pianist: technical facility, tonal control, emotional intelligence, and the courage to embrace musical ideas that challenged conventional expectations. As the final notes faded, May kept her hands on the keys, eyes closed, staying within the moment for a few seconds longer. When she finally looked up, the hall was completely silent. Then from the back of the auditorium, someone began to applaud. Others joined, and suddenly the entire hall was filled with enthusiastic applause, people rising to their feet in a standing ovation that caught May by surprise. In the front row, Professor Walsh remained seated, his expression unreadable. But as May took her final bow and prepared to leave the stage, she saw him lean over to speak to the woman beside him, gesturing toward the stage with unusual animation. Backstage, May was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, fellow musicians, critics, representatives from artist management companies. Their cards and contact information blurred together as she accepted their congratulations, still processing what had just happened on stage. Eventually, the crowd thinned, and May found herself face-to-face with Professor Walsh. Up close, she could see that he had aged in the years since her audition, the lines around his eyes deeper, his hair more gray than black. "Ms. Lynn," he said, his voice formal but lacking its former condescension. That was a revelation. "Thank you, Professor," May replied, surprised by the genuine appreciation in his tone. "The Bradford piece particularly. I haven't heard it performed with such insight since—" He hesitated. "Well, since Eleanor Wright played it at her faculty recital many years ago." May smiled. She's the one who introduced me to it. Walsh nodded slowly. Of course she did. He seemed about to say something more, then changed his mind. The conservatory is launching a new visiting artist series next season. We would be honored if you would consider performing. Before May could respond, she felt Eleanor's presence beside her. Walsh straightened slightly, his expression shifting to one of complex recognition. Eleanor, he acknowledged. It's been a long time. Robert, Eleanor replied, her tone neutral but not unfriendly. Your student has become quite the pianist. A fleeting look of surprise crossed Walsh's face. My student? Weren't you the one who told her she should find something less ambitious than piano? Eleanor asked, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. Walsh had the grace to look embarrassed. I may have misjudged Ms. Lynn's potential. You judged her technique, Eleanor corrected him. You never heard her music. Later, at a small celebration dinner with Eleanor and her parents, May felt a strange sense of completion. The circle that had begun with rejection and humiliation had somehow transformed into something entirely different. Not triumph over those who had dismissed her, but freedom from needing their approval at all. What happens next? Her father asked as they shared dessert. May thought about the business cards in her purse, the invitations to perform, the opportunities that now seemed to be opening before her. I think, she said slowly, I'd like to teach. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. With all these performance opportunities? I'll still perform, May assured her. But there are other pianists out there, people who don't fit the traditional mold who might never find their way into places like Harmon. They deserve to be heard too. Eleanor smiled, a look of profound satisfaction on her face. And what will you teach them first? May returned the smile, thinking of shy little Lily and her perfect C, of all she had learned about music and herself over these past years. One note, she said. Everything begins with one perfect note.